Sydney, Australia. Australia's most world-renowned city. Since the invasion of the Anglo-Saxons in Botany Bay in 1788, it has grown into the largest city in Australia and one of the most renowned cities in the world, culminating in its hosting of the 2000 Summer Olympics. Its name is synonymous with the Harbour Bridge, the Opera House, Bondi Beach and Manly. However, whilst all these landmarks have richly contributed towards the growth, history and values of Sydney, the real culture and representations of the city derive from the smaller, less known suburbs. The small inner city suburb of Paddington is one that has continuously reflected values upheld by Australians. This short documentary aims to track the evolution of Paddington from its Eora Nation land originality to the upper middle class landscape present in the 21st century, and along the way show the tremendous influence of its Victorian settlers still present even today. The documentary will explore the immense history present within Paddington, exploring its many different public houses and famous arenas. Where else to begin the history of Paddington than with its traditional owners? The land on which Paddington has been built was originally inhabited by the Gadigal people from the Eora Nation. Their numbers were estimated to be quite low, a number which took a significant loss during the smallpox outbreak, killing nearly 50% of their population. Despite the devastating impact of white Australia's invasion, the Gadigal culture and its people have survived. Whilst many neighbouring suburbs, such as Redfern, have long been a hub for Aboriginal peoples seeking employment, shelter, and connections with community and family, Paddington has always remained with a relatively low Aboriginal population. The lack of Aboriginal presence allowed Paddington to be strongly shaped by the Victorian ideals of the colonisers. The first constructions by settlers were roads, often built along previously made Aboriginal tracks. Many of these roads are still used today. South Head Road, present-day Oxford Street, was built along an Aboriginal track upon the highest ridge. The creation of these roads, and especially Head Road, running from Watsons Bay along the harbour, led to approval of a few land grants to James Underwood, Robert Cooper and Francis Forbes. The person who was strongly responsible for the creation of this suburb is James Underwood. He was granted a large portion of land in which he built a distillery. Post-construction, after several disagreements and legal proceedings, Underwood was given a larger portion of the land, and he then proceeded to divide his estate in 1839. This divided estate, Paddington Estate, after the famous London borough of Paddington. However, whilst Paddington is now recognisable as an area within the city of Sydney, it wasn't until the construction of the Victoria Barracks in the 1840s that Paddington truly began to emerge. This occurred due to the large number of artisans working on the barracks, creating the need for personal accommodation nearby. This, alongside the small community that emerged to provide goods and services to the barracks, truly marked the beginning of Paddington. The early landscape of Paddington truly reflected wider Australia, with Paddington blue-collar workers who live in small, modest houses situated next to the mansions and estates such as Juniper House, Alfred House and Duxford House, all owned by the wealthy. This strong Victorian presence is immediately noticed when walking through the tranquil streets of Paddington. A simple stroll reveals an abundance of traditional Victorian semi-attached terraces. This clearly illustrates the impact of colonisers on the landscape and architecture of Sydney. It was during the period of Paddington's expansion in the late 19th century that these terraces were constructed. Further, during this period, the rapid expansion and increase in residency saw the construction of a large number of schools and public hotels, with Paddington still presently host to a large number of pubs, reflecting the consistent favour of pubs in the eyes of the Australian public. Many of these pubs were given classic Australian pub names, such as the Royal Hotel, the Imperial Hotel, and the London Hotel. Pubs have long played an integral role in the community life and political state of Australia. The same is said for Paddington. Often the epicentre of the public sphere, pubs in Paddington have always and continue to provide the community with convenient meeting areas used for a variety of reasons. In modern times, this can be as simple as watching sport. However, in the past, pubs have been used as the venues to host community meetings where important decisions regarding the suburb have been decided. However, whilst most commonly pubs were accepted, there were small pockets that saw the large number of pubs and sale of alcohol as extremely problematic, although these voices never significantly impacted the suburb. During the early 20th century, Paddington was thriving, bustling, and expanding as a trendy, sought-after living area. This is reflective of wider Australia and Sydney, with nearly one-third of its population living in inner-city suburbs such as Paddington during the early 1900s. However, after World War II, during the Great Depression, Paddington suffered greatly. This was due to the nature of the blue-collar workers, and the fall of Paddington saw it gain fame as a notorious inner-city slum, something that the general public of Australia despised. The slum that was created in Paddington was the quintessential opposite of the much romanticised outback and bushman persona. However, as ideals shifted away from this outback hero towards a more middle-class dominant landscape, Paddington itself began to undertake a significant transformation of gentrification. Due to its convenient location, plethora of pubs and places to eat, and affordable location, the 1960s onwards saw Paddington become reborn and develop into a highly sought-after upper middle-class suburb. A large source of the gentrification of Paddington arose from the European migrants to the city who found it affordable and helped spur the increase in the socio-economic status of the suburb and also saved it from redevelopment. In 1964, the Paddington Society was formed with the aim of preserving the traditional buildings in Paddington and stopping the redevelopment of its terraced buildings. This resident action group is believed to be the first of its kind and clearly shows the importance of Paddington, as well as its revival during the late 20th century. During this gentrification, there was a significant increase in the number of art galleries within the suburb. This occurred early in the transitional days, with many artists and students opting to live in Paddington. This is still largely present in Paddington today. An extremely important part of Australian culture and central to the suburb of Paddington that we have not yet explored is sport. Australia always has been and always will be a sporting nation. Paddington has played an integral role in Australian sports. The main sporting events of Sydney used to be held in Hyde Park. However, after the construction of the Victoria Barracks in Paddington, soldiers began using a nearby field to play sport. This field would go on to become the Sydney Cricket Ground. This cricket ground has been instrumental in the growth of national sport within Australia and reflects the values of Australians, illustrates how Paddington has reflected these values, as well as showing the tremendous influence of the English settlers on Australian culture. After the completion of the Sydney Football Stadium in 1988, Paddington had truly become the centre of sport within Sydney and New South Wales, providing two large stadiums for a wide range of professional sport, attracting hundreds of thousands of viewers every year. Paddington. This Victorian-styled suburb, full of public houses, art galleries, restaurants and parks, has become one of the most sought-out areas to live in Sydney. The suburb has had a turbulent history, going through many ups and downs. Paddington reflects many different important aspects of culture that shape the Australian nation and its imagined community. Its ever-changing demographics have seen it home to bogans, battlers, and a strong working-class population. Then, during its gentrification in the 1960s, saw it become the home to many English-speaking migrants, reflecting a strong increase in immigration to the country. Whilst traditional romanticised notions of home in Australia have always been seen as the bush, Paddington has been a strong representation of the perceived home in the city. Finally, the public hotels have historically and continually played an integral role in the community of Paddington and Australia.